Hi, today we're going to be talking about retirement planning for someone in their 50s. So, we've got a couple videos going over retirement planning in your 30s, retirement planning in your 40s. And this video, we're mainly going to discuss if you are starting retirement planning in your 50s, some of the strengths you might have, some of the weaknesses you might have, and kind of what you need to kind of think about when it comes to starting retirement planning later in life. Now, right off the bat, some of the strengths you're going to have when you start planning in your 50s is that you're in your highest earning years. Traditionally, you start to peak at earning years in your late 40s, going into your early 50s. You do sometimes see, on average, kind of income start to drop down a little bit in your later 50s, but you're typically in those higher earning years. Another kind of benefit you have and a strength you would have in your plan is that you typically have lower expenses. Usually, college cost is starting to drop off. Typically, children are moving out of the house, so it's you and your spouse again. Your living expenses are a little bit lower. Ideally, your mortgage is starting to get paid off or very close to getting paid off. So, you not only do you have a larger income than you possibly had earlier in your career, you do typically have less expenses than you had earlier in your career as well. The other thing that's a benefit is you're closer to retirement. Now, could be a benefit or a weakness, just depending, but where it's a benefit is the fact that you are closer to retirement. You now have a better picture of what your retirement's going to look like. You know what you're going to be doing day to day, more than likely. You can start to plan around what a budget and an expected income need would be in retirement, how much of your Social Security is going to be able to cover that. If you have a pension, how much of that pension is going to be able to cover that, and then really start to map out what you need to save to get that little extra amount that you might not have saved yet that you need to kind of meet your goals for retirement. Now, some weaknesses are going to be time. You just don't have a lot of time for your money to compound, which means you are going to have to save a lot more if you are not caught up from saving earlier. And also flexibility. You're not going to have a lot of flexibility either. You're going to really have to do a lot of things in a very aggressive manner. You just don't have the time to take breaks and pause your retirement savings. You don't have any flexibility in that kind of built-in plan because you're not starting in your 30s and you're not starting in your early 40s where you could take a year break and it not matter. You need to utilize as much of the time you have left as possible. Now, to kind of jump back to that first strength about income, typically most people see their highest earning years hitting in their early 50s. As we can see here in this chart, 2020 and 2021 median income by age, that 45 to 54 was the highest. And then you do start to see it trickle down a little bit as you get into 55 and then 65. Part of that is people typically go part time when they get into their 60s. If they retire, they might go part time because they're not necessarily needing to work full time. Part of it is just job change, something a little bit less stressful as you go into your pre-retirement years. But if you're just starting, you really want to make sure you're evaluating how much of that income you can save, because it's great to be at your highest earning years. It doesn't mean anything if you aren't able to adjust what you're spending in order to save as much as you actually need to save to catch up on retirement plan savings. Now, the other benefit you have is lower expenses. So, what we can kind of see here is 45 to 49, your expenses start to peak right around here. And you can ignore these numbers at the top. What I really want to show is just this general trend we see starting at 50, going into your 60s and 70s, is that spending typically drops down. The big thing that comes off is this education cost. Again, college is typically wrapping up. Kids are moving out of the house, so you're not necessarily paying that. So you're seeing some of your everyday costs, your food and beverage costs, your transportation costs start to drop down a little bit. So again, you're in your highest earning years and your living expenses are starting to drop down. If you have your mortgage paid off as well, or it's starting to get paid off, that's going to open up a lot of room in that monthly budget for you to be able to save. And I say that because if we look at things, we need to really focus on what we can control when we get into this period of our lives. So, looking here, there's really two areas of your retirement savings that you can absolutely control. You can control how much you save and you can control how much you spend. Well, if we're in the time where you're making the most and you're ideally having some of the least amount of living expenses, being able to manipulate that to your benefit is going to be huge. The other thing you can absolutely control is asset allocation and asset location. So, asset allocation is going to be how your accounts are invested. Are they conservative? Are they moderate? Are they aggressive? Asset location is, are you putting it in a 401k? Are you putting it in a traditional IRA? Are you putting a Roth IRA, a brokerage account? How are you actually doing that? Then you have areas that are completely outside of your control, which is monetary policy, interest rate changes, taxation policy, stock market returns. And then there's some things that you can some control about. Longevity, you don't really control that, but you can make decisions, lifestyle decisions that might help you be a little bit healthier and statistically live a little bit longer. The other one that you can kind of control, barring you getting fired or laid off, is your employment. Your employment duration specifically is how long are you working? How long are you going to continue to work? And a lot of that's going to be dictated by how much you have saved, what your retirement goal is, what your living expectations are in retirement, as to how much you actually want to have saved and how long you need to work to be able to reach that saving goal. The other thing you have kind of going on you is, again, we talked about retirement's closer. So you're going to start knowing what you want to do in retirement a little bit clearer. Someone in their 30s say, hey, what's retirement look like for you? I have no idea. Someone in their 40s, the answer is still going to be, I really don't know. You get into your 50s, you're going to start to kind of say, well, I probably want to do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that. So I would recommend really starting to take time and mapping out what your day-to-day life is going to look like in retirement. Because a lot of people say, oh, I want to travel, I want to do XYZ, but they don't know what they want to do with their normal weeks, their non-traveling weeks, because you're not going to travel 365 days out of the year. So what are you going to do spending the time? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to get a part-time job? Maybe getting a part-time job's necessary if you don't have enough saved. But just start to map out, because you're realistically going to spend probably somewhere from 20 to 30 years in retirement, which is potentially a whole nother career for you from that standpoint. And you're going from working probably somewhere between 40 and 50 hours a week to suddenly not working at all. What are you going to do for those extra 40, 50 hours every single week, week in and week out, for your quality of life mentally, for your quality of life physically, for the amount of enjoyment you'll get out of retirement? We strongly recommend you start to map out and plan what your time is going to be spent doing in retirement. Not just financially you're going to be able to make it, but what your time is going to be spent doing, because that is a huge asset you will have going into retirement. Lastly, time's no longer on your side. This is where we kind of really hit numbers on what that savings goal needs to be if you're starting in your 50s. If you start a little bit earlier, what you need to have saved by 50 to kind of hit some benchmarks. So, starting here, if you've kind of been saving off and on, but you're just now getting serious, let's just look at a 50-year-old right here making $80,000. By 50, if you're making $80,000, you really need to probably have about a little over 4 times your income saved. So 4 times that 80,000 saved in retirement accounts if you're 50, planning on retiring around 65. Now, if you have not saved anything before and you still want to shoot for retiring around 65, well, if you're making 80,000, you need to save probably at minimum about 35% of your income uh, towards retirement in order to be able to make 65 possible and maintain a similar lifestyle that you were leading at an $80,000 income. Now, the hard part is if you have not saved before, 35% is a absolutely massive hurdle. Even if you do consistently save 10 or 15%, that jump to 35 is a major portion of your income. And that's why we say with 50, You have some strengths with the lower spending amount typically. If your kids aren't on your payroll anymore, if you don't have college costs anymore, if the mortgage is paid off, you have a lot of flexibility in your monthly budget. It's, can you have the discipline to use that efficiently and wisely to meet those goals, those saving goals that you need to? If you do not, or it's not possible for you to hit that 35%, then what you need to look at is, again, pushing retirement back a few years, really reevaluating what your lifestyle in retirement is going to be, how far Social Security is going to stretch for you. But when you're talking about retiring in your 50s, these are some of the weaknesses, these are some of the strengths that you're going to have to play with. It's figuring out what's going to fit best for your situation. But we appreciate you watching the videos. Please check out more of them, and I hope you have a great day.